I mean, Kathy was always so frustrated because our kids never put their clothes away. They never put them in the drawers, never put them in the laundry chute. They just went right on the floor, just right on the floor. And the thing that was frustrating for her was she didn't throw her clothes on the floor, so why were her kids doing it? It was a great mystery for us. And this morning as I was getting ready, I looked and I thought, somebody's throwing my clothes on the floor.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
So anyway, you probably noticed a little football theme going on here today. And I don't know if you know this, but the Bible is sports from the beginning to end. Did you know that? I mean, maybe not about baseball or football so much, but baseball for sure. I mean, look at the very first line of the Bible, right? Genesis 1:1, in the beginning. Eve stole first, Adam stole second, Cain struck out Abel, the prodigal son came home, Rebekah went to the mound with a pitcher, the righteous run into it and are safe. And the angels and the giants, well, they got rained out. You remember that story. Baseball, 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 baseball. And I know that all guys love all sports, and that's the truth. And in Winnipeg, Canada, I mean, we love our hockey. I get that. But we're doing football today, and there's something about football that I think is synonymous with fatherhood. And we love football because you know what it is? It's the modern day gladiators. It's 60 minutes of legalized violence. And you can sit down in front of the TV with your bag of chips, do nothing, and watch people kill each other, just about. The carnage, you can just watch it take place. So that's what football is all about, and we love football. And one of the great football movies of all time, and this is where I'm getting my title for my message today, is Any Given Sunday. How many remember that movie? It was an Oliver Stone movie, came out in 1999. It was a star-studded movie, and many people think it's the greatest football movie of all time. Who knows? But this is what he wanted to do. He wanted to portray the violence and the carnage of the game. So he took his whole cast and his crew to watch Saving Private Ryan. And then he told him, you know that scene on the beach where they're all killing each other? That's what I want my football movie to look like. And so here he had this very famous crew. There was Cameron Diaz and there was Dennis Quaid and different people. And fun fact that Sean Puff Daddy Coombs was to play the quarterback. And this is how they worded it. He threw a ball like a girl, so we sent him on the plane home. And they replaced him with Jamie Foxx. And of course, this made him a superstar, as you know today. So anyway, here's the story. You have Al Pacino. He's playing the coach, Tony D'Amato. And it was this once great NFL team that's struggling now to make the playoffs. And so what he does is he has to inspire his team. And so there's these great speeches. That's what makes the movie. These great speeches. And I won't give them all to you, but I'll give you one line from them. And this is what he says. On any given Sunday, you're going to win or you're going to lose. The point is, are you going to win or lose like a man? And when I think of fatherhood, I think that's the question. We're not going to win every battle, but I'll tell you where the battle is won. The battle of fatherhood is won on any given Sunday. And let me explain what I'm talking about. We're fathers 7 days a week. I get that. But what are you doing Monday to Friday? I'll tell you what you're doing. You're storming the castle. You're slaying the dragon. That's what you're doing, right? You're busy. And, you're away from the house a lot. But then the weekends come, and you have to decide, what are you going to do? Are you going to be a parent? Are you going to be a father? Or are you going to go to the golf course? Or are you going to sit in front of the TV the whole time? And, we feel justified in that. We can say, well, I worked hard all week. I brought home the bacon, and now it's my time to relax. And I think our A-time, our prime time is on Sunday and on Saturday. And those are the time when men really need to focus on raising their kids. There's this story about this golfer, and he goes out golfing one Sunday morning, and he's got 4 caddies with him, and his friend said, Charlie, what's with the 4 caddies? He said, the wife thinks I should be spending more time with the kids. And you get that, right? Like the caddies, the kids, they're like the same, it's not that funny, is it? Really? But you get the point. And about 20 years ago, I heard Robert Schuller say something. Do you know Robert Schuller, Crystal Cathedral? You remember him? He was on TV, The Hour of Power, and he said something that stuck with me to this day. He said, I decided years ago that I was going to be a good parent rather than a good golfer. And I thought about that when I heard it 20 years ago, and I thought, you know what, he's right. To become a good golfer takes an immense amount of time, immense amount of hours and days on the golf course. And he decided he was going to be a better parent than a golfer. And so I was a golfer at the time, and I didn't go all the time, but I went once a week during the summer. And I thought, my kids are getting a little older here, and I really actually gave up golf so that I could invest into them and invest in their sports. And now they're all better athletes than I am. But I think it was the right thing to do, because what we need to do is think, what are we going to do with our weekends? What are we going to do with our Sunday? And on any given Sunday, that's when we need to be parenting and doing our utmost. So I want to tell you a little Father's Day story. I'm going to tell you right at the outset that it's sort of a sad story, and it's autobiographical, but it's a true story, and it'll make a point. And so in 1958, it's June, it's Father's Day, and if you do the math on this, I'm 1 year old. And I've got two older brothers. They're 2.5 and they're 4 years old. We lived in a big, beautiful house on the Red River. We had a dock and a boat down by the river. And my dad was a successful lawyer. This Father's Day, Sunday afternoon, my two brothers are out playing in the backyard. I'm lying in my crib staring at the ceiling, contemplating how I'm going to take over the world. And I still do that today, not the crib part, but the rest of it. And so there we were, and my parents were sitting there in the sunroom watching the other two brothers in the yard. And my father turns to my mother and says, "We really have a great life, don't we?" And she agreed that their life was pretty blessed. And not moments later, in a moment of neglect, of just not looking, the two boys went down to the dock. And the younger of the two, Timmy, 2.5 years old, leaned against the boat, and the boat floated out, and he fell between the boat and the dock. My older brother ran up, told my dad. My dad wasn't, probably less than a minute before he got down to the dock, but you know what the Red River looks like, murky brown water. And he dove under that water, and he looked, and he searched, and he searched, and he searched for my brother. And several minutes went by, and he finally brought out of the water his 2.5-year-old lifeless son. And he lost his son that day on Father's Day in 1958. And let me tell you something, we're not really wired to lose our children. So we're not wired to we're wired to outlive them, not the other way around. Or rather, they're wired to outlive us, not the other way around. We're not wired that way. And so my poor father had nowhere to put this. And he wasn't a man of faith. And so people of faith can deal with it better than people who are not of faith. But he didn't know what to deal with that. So this tragedy caused a lot of upheaval in our family. And my father actually never observed Father's Day for the rest of his life. And when Sundays came along, any given Sunday, my mother would take us off to the church, and by the time we got home, my father had gone to the office on Sunday afternoon. And he did that almost every week. And what he did was he buried himself in the work because he didn't know how to deal with this emotionally. And, you know, my dad was a great dad. We had a good relationship. He's a very generous person, kind person. But you know what? He was emotionally detached. And that was the world that I was brought up in. And the role of a father is to connect heart to heart with their children, because that's what the Bible tells us. The very last thing that God said in the Old Testament, in the book of Malachi, or as I like to call it, Malachi, which apparently aggravates people. But nevertheless, in that book, the last thing he says is he will bring the great and terrible day of the Lord upon the earth. But he says before that happened, he said this, "I will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the father, lest I cast a curse upon the earth." Now let me remind you about something. When we look at our world and when we see estrangement between fathers and their children, what do you see? You see chaos. What do you see? You see gangs, you see violence, you see kids running astray. And so God says in the last thing, which is often the most important thing you say, before the closing out of the Old Testament, he says, this is what I want to do. I want to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. And of all metaphors, God has chosen fatherhood to describe himself and his relationship with us. Why did he do that? And it's a profoundly deep and important relationship, and it's all about our heart-to-heart relationship with him and our heart-to-heart relationship with our own children. So let me tell you a little more redemptive story. How many of you are NFL fans? Any NFL fans in the room? You would recognize this name, Kurt Warner. Now, Kurt Warner, before Tom Brady came along, Kurt Warner was the greatest, quarterback arguably of all time. And he broke every single record, just record after record after record. He was only in the game for 12 years, and they inducted him into the Hall of Fame. And when he was playing, he played for the Cardinals, the Rams, the Giants. And 1999 won the Super Bowl. 1999, he was named as the most valuable player in the Super Bowl. and it's a big award. But the very, very same year, he was named by Family Magazine as Father of the Year. And because his priorities are this, it's faith, family, and football. And here he is with his wife and his 7 children. And he loves his family more than anything in this world. And this is what he said. He has a son who's Zach, who's blind and mentally handicapped. And he says, Zach falls down 10 times a day, but gets up with a smile on his face. Why would I ever get down on myself for losing a game or throwing an interception? And he's a father that understood what was really more important. He said, being named Father of the Year was more valuable to me than being named most valuable player. So he put it all into perspective. And so I want to challenge you men today about what kind of men we're going to be and what we're going to do on any given Sunday. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 quick points here as to how you can score some touchdowns with your kids. And you want to get them into the end zone, you want to score, and so here's 3 plays that we have. Now there are other fatherhood plays, but these are 3 fatherhood plays that I think will score some touchdowns with your kids. And this is what they are. I'm using the TDs as my little acronym. The T stands for take them into the trenches. The D stands for dare to be a coach. And the S stands for send up a Hail Mary. How many of you know what that is in football? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. So the first thing is this, is the T stands for take them into the trenches. And if you're a football fan, you know what the trenches are. It's that area surrounding and around the line of scrimmage. And they call it that because you've got the 2 lines lined up, the defense and the offense, and it's like a military trench warfare, and they're going at each other. And one of the oldest expressions in football is any game is won in the trenches. It doesn't matter how good a quarterback you have. You could have Tom Brady or you could have Kurt Warner, but you know what? If your front line can't defend the pocket, you're not going to win that game. And so the game is won or lost in the trenches. And I think for a fatherhood, I think the game is won or lost in the trenches. And what we need to be doing is we need to be getting ourselves out of the stands and into the field and into the trenches. Some of you know my friend Brian Warren. Brian is one of the hosts of 100 Huntley Street on television. And he actually has 2 Grey Cup rings. He's a big football superstar in Canada. And he once told me this. He said, you know what, the church reminds me of a football game where you have 24,000 people in the stands that desperately need some exercise, watching 24 people on the field who desperately need a rest. And it's a little bit of the picture of the church and how we have people in the stands and people on the fields. And here's the challenge is to move from the stands to the field. And if we're watching from the sidelines, you do know this. You do not score any points from the bleachers or from the sidelines. You need to get out of the stands and into the field and into the game. And one of the things we need to do as fathers, the best and most important thing you can do as a father, is you can take your kids along for the journey. You know, this is so simple what I'm going to give you here in a moment. But they've done the research on this, and the most effective thing a father can ever do spiritually for their children, you know what it is? Take your kids to church. It's honestly that simple. They've done research on this. There was a Swiss study of the church in Switzerland, and they found that if a father took his kids to church, irrespective of what the mother did, 42% of them attended church as adults. But if a mother alone took the children without the father, it was only 2%. Now, I know in a church like this, those percentages are going to be much higher, but I don't want you to miss the fact is that when parents do something, when the father does it, the kids will follow. There is something profound about kids wanting to imitate their father. They might listen to their mother, but they imitate the father. The father doesn't even have to say anything. He just sits there like a dope eating his cereal a certain way, and his kids will start eating the cereal the same way. Have you noticed that? It's just the way we are wired as kids to imitate our fathers, and the scripture tells us that that will happen. And that's why it says the sins of the father are visited down onto the children, onto the 3rd and the 4th generation. Why? Because we imitate our fathers. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. I saw it again and again in our home. I mean, Kathy was always so frustrated because our kids never put their clothes away. They never put them in the drawers, never put them in the laundry chute. They just went right on the floor, just right on the floor. And the thing that was frustrating for her was she didn't throw her clothes on the floor, so why were her kids doing it? It was a great mystery for us. And this morning as I was getting ready, I looked and I thought, somebody's throwing my clothes on the floor. Crazy. But there's something about this, and I don't want you to miss. All a father has to do is come to church, and his kids will come to church. And there is something about when a father gets involved And when a father gets into the trenches and starts living spiritually, you know what? The kids come along. Let me give you an amazing statistic. They discovered that out of men who come to Christ, 93% of their families will follow, the whole family will follow them to Christ if a man will come to Christ. For a woman, it's 17%, which is wonderful. I'm thrilled for that. But do you see how powerful this is? And they know this in the mission field. In the mission field, what you always do if you go to a Muslim country or Hindu country, you try to win the father to Christ, because if you win the father to Christ, guess what? You win everybody, the whole family to Christ. And see, what we need in this day and age, I want you to think about this. Just do the math. What should our target be? Our target needs to be the men. Our target needs to be the fathers, because if we can win the fathers, we can win everybody else. And so many times we have been criticized in this church, you know, that people look at this church and say, you know, this is kind of a masculine-oriented church. You know, it's not unlike you people to throw footballs in the church. It's not unlike you to preach in a football jersey. Why do you have so many males on leadership and senior leadership? Why is it all these men? In fact, I was criticized one day of this gal. She said to me, you know, you're hiring all these young pastors. Why are you hiring all these young pastors? It looks like an old boys club. I said, correction, it's a young boys club. Let's get the math right on this. But you know what? I don't actually make any apology for this. Because if we don't have at least some sort of masculine content in the church, guess what? We're not going to win the men to the church. We need to begin to see, here's what women really want. You know what women want? I'll tell you what they want. They want their husbands to stand up and be the man in the house and to be the spiritual lead and to lead spiritually and bring the whole family along. That's what the men are looking for, and the women are looking for it as well. You get this, don't you? It was 20 years ago. I was at a conference, and this guy is telling this story, and there's about, I don't know, maybe 50 of us in this workshop, and he's leading this workshop, and he's talking about how to reach the lost. And he's telling this story about how this man in his church came to him one time and said, Pastor, this weekend I'm bringing two friends of mine. They're both bikers, and I just want you to be a little bit sensitive to the fact that, you know, they're not used to church, and if you could maybe do something not to make them uncomfortable, that would be great. So the pastor says, well, what are your biker friends into? He says, well, they're deadheads. He goes, what? What's a deadhead? He said, well, a deadhead is someone's into Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead. That's their music. And he went, oh, okay. So he says, we'll see what we can do. So he goes to his worship leader and he says, so, Derek, this is what we're doing on Sunday. We have some bikers coming. We need you to do not one, but two Grateful Dead songs. The worship leader goes, what? He says, and so anyway, he goes and learns some Grateful Dead songs. Those bikers show up, and the church is doing worship that sounds suspiciously like the Grateful Dead. So this guy's telling this story in this workshop, and I'm looking around at the other pastors, and they're like, say what? And they're not getting this. And finally, one of the pastors put up his hand and said, well, I have a question. While you were singing the Grateful Dead, what were the rest of the congregation thinking? He said, oh, they didn't even notice. They thought we were singing about the rapture. Thank you for enjoying that. You get my point, is that if we're going to have a church that's going to attract men, we're going to have to do some things that attract men. And if we can get the men, we can get the kids. And men, it's the most important thing you can do. Any given Sunday, you know where you should be? You should be in church. So that's the first thing. Take them into the trenches. The second thing, the D, is for dare to be a coach. Now let me ask you a question. What do Tiger Woods, Wayne Gretzky, and Michael Jordan all have in common? Other than the fact that they were the greatest at their sport at the peak of their game. Other than that, what do they all have in common? They had dads who were their coaches. And you've probably all heard the story about Tiger Woods. His father put a golf club in his hand at 2 years old. And he wrote a book about it. His dad is Earl Woods, and here's his book. It's called Training a Tiger, A Father's Guide to Raising a Winner in Both Golf and Life. And Tiger will say this. He said, the greatest influence in my life in golf was my father, who coached him for many years until he kind of outgrew his ability and he got other coaches. And then we have Wayne Gretzky. His father was who? You know this. Walter Gretzky. And Walter Gretzky, of course, is famous for every winter. He would make a rink in the backyard and he would train his son. And for many, many years. And you'll remember his famous quote, son, go to where the puck is going to be, not where it was. And of course, that was his key understanding of the game, and he became the Great One. Who has a nickname like the Great One? Nobody calls me the Great One. Have you noticed? Well, someone did this morning, but they were being sarcastic. And then, of course, we have Michael Jordan, same story, one of the greats for the Chicago Bulls. And his father, James R. Jordan, was also a semi-professional basketball player and his coach early on. And all three of these men say the same thing. Their fathers had the greatest influencing on them because they coached them as young men. Now, I know what a bunch of you are thinking. You're thinking, I don't know how to coach. Yes, you do. You think you don't, but you do. And I'll prove it to you. How many of you have kids over the age of 16? How many have kids over the age of 16? Let me see your hands. Hold them up. Just keep holding them up. How many of you who have kids over the age of 16, you taught them how to drive? Oh, same amount of hands are all up. And so how many of you remember that? You taught your kids how to drive. You remember how that worked, right? So you get in the car, you sit in the driver's seat, and you let them sit there and watch you, and you lecture them, right? Is that how it worked? What did you have to do? Does anybody remember? You had to get out of the driver's seat, bite your tongue, and let them behind the wheel. And you had to move over. It was the most painful and frustrating and scary experience of your life. And you went and sat in that passenger seat while you watched your 16-year-old daughter try to drive that stick. And of course, you kept on hitting the brake pedal, but there was no brake pedal there because you were on the passenger side. But eventually you got it because you let them do it. Right? You're following this? And you sat in the passenger seat and you coached them along and they eventually succeeded. So I remember that I taught all three of my kids how to drive. And by the time I got to my youngest, the one you know and love, and by the time I got to here, I was really sick of driving the kids. I thought I'm just going to teach her how to drive and be done with this. I love her sort of barely, but I never want to drive her again. And so I taught her how to drive. As soon as she learned how to drive, as soon as she got her license, I gave her the car. I said, I'm never driving you again. I am sick of you. You got that? And I still loved her. And so anyway, so off she goes with the car. She's happy as a clam. I never have to wake up early again to drive her to school or to sports. But anyway, one Saturday morning, I get a phone call. And it's my daughter. And she has been driving to a early morning basketball game. And she says, Pop, I got a problem. The car has quit. I said, what happened? She said, well, it sounded like a machine gun, kind of like this. I said, what does it sound like now? She says, doesn't sound like a gun at all. And so then I got up, grabbed a coffee, got in the van, drove down to where she was stranded on Pembina Highway, opened the hood, pulled out the dipstick, dry. No oil on the dipstick. The motor is gone. So I get it towed to the mechanic, had to put a new motor in the car, and I told the mechanic it was my fault. He says, explain to me how that works. Your daughter doesn't put oil in the car, and it's somehow your fault? I said, well, it was my fault because I taught her how to drive, but I never taught her how to maintain the car. And you see, that's what coaching's all about. It's about taking them to the full level and taking them along the journey. And I realized I gave up on her. I wasn't done parenting, and I wasn't done coaching her. And when I look at Jesus, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but Jesus went and, he grabbed those 12 young men. And if you think about it, what did he do? He coached them. And he wanted them to take over from where he was leaving off. And he was training these guys, and they had very specific roles, and he was getting them ready for the future. He spent 3.5 years training them and preparing them and coaching them. And here's what I don't want you to miss. See, what a coach does is he identifies different skills and talents in his players, and he puts them in the right position. And see, that's what Jesus did. You go read the story. He had different roles for different men. And so you go read John 21. They had this little controversy about this because, he's telling Peter he was going to do one thing. He was telling John he was going to do another thing. And Peter kind of contends and says, what about this man? And he says, what I do with that man is none of your business. He says, you do what you do, and he's going to do what he's going to do. What was Jesus doing? He was coaching his players to be able to be a superstar team. And you know what? You have to do the same thing as a parent. You can't just parent your kids all the same way and expect them to find their path in life. And here's one of the biggest mistakes fathers make, and mothers, but I'm going to blame the fathers today because it's Father's Day. And one of the biggest mistakes fathers do is they don't give their kids enough direction when they're in those formative years about, university, finishing high school. And you've seen those kids. You've probably had one of those kids. They're 18 years old, and they finish high school, and they're walking around, So what are you going to do with your life? I don't know. Can't decide what to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll be a brain surgeon. Maybe I'll be a fry cook. I don't know. And they don't know what to do. They have no direction in life. They're down in the basement playing video games, and you're going, oh, my kid, he's such a loser. No, you're such a loser. You have to figure out what it is that makes them tick and help them. You look at your kids and you identify what their strengths and weaknesses are, and you think, you don't tell them what to do, but you point them in the right direction, because I'll tell you something, you know your children better than they know themselves. You have watched them grow for 18 or 20 years, and you see these gifts and emerging. Let me tell you something. When our son was young and he was in like grade 2 or grade 3, he had this incredible math aptitude. And I mean, I would take him to school and I would throw questions at him like cube roots and square roots, and he was banging them off like this. I thought, how does this kid know all this stuff? And by the time he was in grade 4, he was already doing grade 6 math, and he was winning math contests. Well, do you think I should put him into fine arts? I don't think that's the direction for him. He's got a math brain, so we encouraged him. We didn't make him do anything, but we encouraged him, and he went into computer engineering, and that's what he is today. He's got a very successful career. Now, our daughter, on the other hand, she was good, our second one, she was good at language. Now, my son, he couldn't spell to save his life. Still can't, to this day. If it weren't for spell check, he'd be unemployed. And yet, my daughter, she could spell any word, she could pronounce any word. She had this incredible language skills. Guess what she is today? A speech language pathologist, because we moved her in that direction. And then our youngest daughter, and whom you know and love, her greatest characteristics were sarcastic wit. So she followed her father into ministry. That is true, but that's not why she followed me into ministry. Let me brag on my daughter for just a second. I'll tell you what qualifies her for what she does today. She has always, from the very time that she was a young child, having this incredible and genuine care for other people. That's why she's in the ministry today, and that's what makes her tick. So my encouragement to you parents is, don't stop parenting when your kids are 15 or 18 or 20. You never stop being that parent. And you as fathers, because of your profound influence, you can actually set the direction for your family for generations to come. So the first thing is take them into the trenches. The second thing is dare to be a coach. And the last and the final thing is this, is to send up a Hail Mary. Now, if you know football, you know what the Hail Mary pass is. It's where you're at the end of the game, you only have a few moments left in the game, you're going to lose if you don't get a touchdown, and that quarterback goes deep into the pocket, and he throws it as far and as long as he can throw. And you throw it, and you pray to God that someone will catch it on the other end. And that's the Hail Mary pass. And of course, it got its name from Notre Dame, the Catholic University, when they were throwing these passes that they didn't think anyone would catch, but every once in a while someone catches the pass. And see, we know what a Hail Mary prayer is in the Catholic circles. It's the hour of death prayer. It's the prayer of desperation. And so we know when I say send up the Hail Mary, you know what? We're not going to be perfect parents. You're not going to be a perfect father. You're going to make some mistakes. And maybe if all else fails, you still have the power of prayer. And prayer changes things. Because we often feel like we failed as a parent. We didn't do everything we could have done. But you know what? This is what Paul says, and I'll close with this. 1 Timothy chapter 2, he says, I desire that men everywhere would pray, lifting up holy hands without wrath or doubting. And when he says men, he's using the word males. He says, I want men to pray. Because when men pray, things happen. And we know there's lots of praying mamas out there, but you know what? We need some praying fathers out there. Because this is what the scripture says, and I'll close with this. He says that before the great and terrible day of the Lord, before this whole thing ends, he's going to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. That's what God's goal for you is. And men, you can change this world through your children, and you can throw a few touchdowns because God has given you everything you need to be the kind of father he has called you to be. Amen? All right.
If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.